So far in this music theory for guitar series, I've covered what the root note is, what major, minor, sus2, sus4, and power or five chords are, how the major scale relates to this, and a little bit about seven chords, which seven chords definitely is a really big topic, and you could spend years and years learning all about seven chords. So after that, I mean, you can keep going and learn about more challenging types of chords. But I find after you have about that much knowledge, what's better to do is just start using it. So let's say, let's say you're learning a song, and I don't really have a song in mind, but Ultimate Guitar, pretty much everybody knows it's the best tab site. Free tab, so I'm going to go to Ultimate Guitar and let's see if they have any like featured tabs. Let's think. Well, here's a chord that I like to use. Like, it kind of comes up for music theory. This is kind of an older song, but you can look it up. The intro is really catchy. It's called The Sweater Song, Undone the Sweater Song by Weezer. So I've had a lot of students, even students the last few years, want to learn this. Weezer is one of those bands that stayed popular for a long time. So this intro is pretty catchy, and I recommend trying it out. And this guy actually wrote the chord names, which I didn't really want to show them. So real quick, that's pretty cool. He actually wrote the chord names out. Let me find a different version, maybe this one. So here we go. This guy didn't write the chord names out, and then we'll look at that other tab. So one thing about Ultimate Guitar, like, I always just go for the tabs with the most stars and reviews to start with, but it's pretty shocking. Like, a lot of times that really doesn't mean that much. So it's good to look at a lot of tabs because most of them aren't perfect. But anyways, so this little intro is pretty cool. I recommend looking up this song on YouTube, The Sweater Song by Weezer. And what we want to do is figure out what these chords are and use our music theory. So the first thing, by this point, with the concept of the root note, we should kind of have an idea of what these are right here. These lower notes, I would say like 80% of the time, are the root notes. So like, if you have to bet on what the root note is of these chords, you could just look down at the lowest note. Something does start to happen later, like especially like, let's say you're learning a Jimi Hendrix song. A lot of times he puts the third of major chords in the bass. So with him, like, a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily be able to like look at the bottom note and figure it out. But that's alright, because over time you start to recognize that pattern too. So the first thing we can, if we figure out what this note is, the third fret on the low E string, this is a G note. Maybe I'll do a lesson later about how to find notes on the guitar. There's tons of resources about it. You could just look up a fretboard with all the notes to start doing it. But this note is G. So when I'm looking at this tab, I'm looking at this group of notes as a chord. Partly because I've heard the song, and partly because you can kind of see an arpeggio pattern with the bass notes changing. So the way I'm looking at this is a group, and this is a chord. So I'm actually kind of imagining like strumming it, even though we're going to arpeggiate it. But I just imagine that it's just one thing. It doesn't really matter that it's an arpeggio. So this is going to be some sort of a G chord. But looking at this pattern is very weird, because this B is a major third. This third fret right here is a B flat, which would be in a G minor chord, which would be a flat 3. So this would be a regular 3. This would be a flat 3. And this would be a 6. This E. So that's pretty weird. So I don't even know, like, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know what to call this chord. It's definitely not something I use every day. Then look at this next chord. If you were to figure out what this note is, this is a C note because it's on the A string, and if you go over, so this would be 0 would be A, the second fret would be B, third fret is C. So this is some sort of a C chord. This little thing is the third, the major third, so this is a C major. Then I'm thinking, what is this? Well, this, anytime you go up 2 strings and it's the same number and you're below the B string, it's the flat 7. It's just sort of a useful pattern to know. So this is the flat 7, so we have 1, 3, flat 7, so this is a C dominant 7 chord. And I'm thinking, well, there's a B in there also. So that's kind of weird, because if we didn't have the flat 7, this would be the regular 7. So this would be the major 7. So if we got rid of this, then we would have C major 7. If we got rid of this, we would have C dominant 7. So it's kind of weird. It's like a C major chord, but with a flat 7 and a regular 7. So I don't really know what I would call that, aside from just explaining it the way I did. I do know that this is going to sound kind of tense. Same with this. And then this last chord, the 5th fret on the A string. So this note was C. If you go 2 frets to the right of C, or what's called a whole step, then you have D. So I know this is some sort of a D chord. This was 3-2, here's 5-4, so that's the same little major pattern. So here's a root note. Here is the 3, the major third. Here's another flat 7, so here's a D7 chord. And then we have a B in there, which B in relation to D is a 6, but because we have a flat 7 in there, it should become a 13 chord. So this one, I would be pretty confident this is going to be D13, and then it goes back to this C chord. But this is all kind of weird. I should have made it a little bigger. If you press Command plus on a Mac, you could just make it bigger. So this is all kind of weird. These chords, these first, or these 3. Really, there's only 3 chords here. This one I'm pretty certain is a D13, just from looking at it. And I'm really certain what the root notes are: G, C, D, C. So now the question is, how can you start doing music theory? And especially, like, it's pretty annoying when you're learning guitar and you feel like you're always dependent on other people, like a teacher or your friends. I mean, a lot of making progress with anything is being able to just do stuff on your own, and that's what's great about all these web tools we have now. So what you want to do is go onto Google and type in J, the letter J, guitar. And this is an awesome site. And it's kind of weird because I used to go to this cafe, and this guy would always be there. This was like probably like 8 or 9 years ago, and he was always working on this website. So I actually saw him sort of working on this website a long time ago, and it's still a really cool website. And I think he made it with Java, the programming language Java. So what you want to do is type in JGuitar, and then go down to Chord Namer, and click on that, or you can just click on JGuitar. I'll make it a little bigger. And if you look on this little sidebar, you can find Chord Namer right there. Click on that. So this is a really cool tool. What you do is you just put in the fret numbers on this fretboard, and then it will give the possible names for the chord. So basically he's like got some sort of a program that will put these probably into like some sort of a an array that then like checks them against like a table, and then sorts the possible solutions based on, probably it seems like he has some way to sort. After he matches the possibilities, he sorts by like the ones that are most common, starting with the most obvious root note. So anyways, what we're going to do is take this Weezer song, and we're going to use this tool to figure out what these chords are. And this is what I make my students do, and they really start to get music theory this way, and they can do it on their own, which is sort of the whole point. So 3, and then we're going to have nothing, 2, 3, 0, nothing. So 3, 2, 3, 0, nothing. So then you come back over here, and this is the bottom E string, so we need 3. Then we needed nothing. So you gotta make sure it's on mute. See, this left column is mute. This is open string, so that would be wrong. We gotta keep that as a mute. So we had 3, 2, just to check again. 3, 2, 3, 0, nothing. 3, nothing, 2, 3. Now we need a 0, not a mute. So 0, nothing. It's kind of cool. This is sort of quiet, but you can even hear the chord. It's so quiet. I'm going to turn this up. You probably can't hear that, but definitely sounds like the beginning of this Weezer song. Then you just hit go. And then it generates possible chord names. So looking at this, there's 4 possible chord names. This last one I know is wrong because this is saying that the root note is B. And it's possible to think about it like that, like if your bass player was playing B in the bass. But right now I know this is a G chord because we have G in the root. There's no bass player playing anything. We're not coming from a B minor chord. So this one I'm just ignoring it altogether. This isn't right. So then the question is, which one of these is it? Well, partly I know later in the song it plays G, C, D. So that's leading me to think it's going to be a major chord. And partly that's a little more advanced why I would think that. So right here, these would be major chords because there's no M. This would be minor chord. So because of what happens later in the song, and even looking at the order of these root notes, G, C, D, C, like I kind of have an intuition it's going to be a major chord. So then the question becomes, is it this one or this one? Well, most of the time the top one when you're using this program is right. So I'm going with this. I actually do have a better reason why I wouldn't go with this, because it seems weird to me to think about adding a flat 3 in there. Like when I think of that, when I see a sharp 9, it makes me think of a tension chord. And when you hear this chord, if you try playing it, it's definitely tense. So I would go with this one. So G6 add 9. So real quick, I'm going to keep this tab open. I'm going to go back to Ultimate Guitar. And I'm going to search for Sweater Song. I want to go to that other tab again. Oh, so see, he had that chord G6 add sharp 9. And that's what we got from this one. So the question is why, like what does that mean? Like what is this talking about? G6 add sharp 9. Well, what's happening is we have the root, so this is the 1. Then we have the 3, which would make it a major chord. This B up here is a 3 of G. And again, all this is coming from a G major scale. Like it's in relation to a G major scale. So this is the 1 of a G major scale. G, A, B would be the 3rd note. And then we have the 6. And then sometimes I'll say the scale in my head. This is getting more advanced, but you can think G, 1, A, B, C, D, E. A lot of times I'll just count it on my fingers. G, A, B, C, D, E. So that's the 6th note of a G major scale. So that's why there's a 6 here. And then we have the sharp 9. And partly why I would consider that a sharp 9 and not something else is because we have the 3rd in this. So if we would have had, let's say we had only this note right here, this would be considered the 2 if we didn't have the 3. But because we have the 3, once the 3 is there, you can't really call it a 2 anymore. So you call it a 9, and then we're sharpening the 9 and putting it over here. So it's a little more advanced, and if it doesn't make sense, I wouldn't worry about it. The whole goal of this video is to show how you can start figuring out what these chord names are while you're learning real songs. And what I recommend is like write it on the tab or write it on a piece of paper while you're playing it, and just having this sort of name in mind as you're learning the song, or like a song that uses other chords, kind of thinking about it. Like over time, if you do it for a few years, you'll really know all the music theory you need to know, because it will be related to the songs that you care about. Because one thing that can happen, like let's say you sit down and you try to memorize, you get a book that has every version of G6 add sharp 9 in it. Well, that would be like the same thing as like if you're learning, like let's say you're taking a history class. Like, are you really going to try to memorize every fact about history? Like, even if you were to do that, you're just going to keep forgetting the facts that you don't need to know. So, I mean, you can't, like, I don't really know. If someone asked me to play G6 add sharp 9, I don't use that chord regularly. Like G6 I use all the time. I really like that chord, so if someone asked me to play G6, I could figure out, or I actually know a few ways to do it right off the top of my head. But if someone really pressed me, like we need a G6 add sharp 9, I could figure it out using some of my fretboard knowledge and music theory. But I wouldn't know off the top of my head because it's not important enough. And like you just forget stuff that's not important. So let's go to the next chord. So the next chord is 3, 2, 3, 0. So I'm going to jump back over here. Sometimes it's good just to mute these out. 3, 2, 3, 0. You can hear what it sounds like. It's kind of quiet. So this chord, let's see what it is. C7 add 7. So what he's saying is it's a C dominant 7, like a bluesy chord, which would be 1, 3, 5 flat 7, but then we're adding the major 7. So that makes sense. This is a weird chord. Like I would not know what to call this. I would be thinking, well, it's a dominant 7 with a regular 7 in it. So I guess that's how you say it. It's not a common enough chord. To me, it's just a tension chord. So like I was saying, I would probably just recognize this shape and think, oh, it's a C dominant 7 because that shape with that. Also, when you hear the song, when you hear the chord, it doesn't sound like a major 7 chord with a flat 7 in it because it's too tense. Like major 7s just sound smooth and nice. So if someone said it's a major 7 chord with a flat 7 in it, it would seem a little backwards because C7s are almost kind of dissonant. The blues is more dissonant, whereas if you had a major 7 chord, like if we were to get rid of this flat 7 right here, just do that. Like there's a C major 7 chord. Like this sounds nice. It sounds like all smooth. Whereas just a regular, there's a regular C7 chord, it sounds pretty dissonant. So again, the chord was like that though. So again, you don't have to really know what this means. Now these chords, like really when you're using this app, a lot of this stuff is just like makes no sense. The only way this would make sense is if you had a bass player playing E, or if you were like strumming an E minor and you just briefly went to this whole chord, which wouldn't really happen, but let's say, I guess it could happen if you were holding down, like if you were doing like that and you had E here and then all of a sudden you went to that. Let's see what this would give us. See, I think that's the same chord even without that. So there's these weird relationships between a lot of chords that you'll start to pick up on. Like G major and E minor are almost the same chord, and G6 and E minor are even more similar. So there's a lot of similarities, like B minor and G are almost the same chord. So doing music theory, you start to see like where chords overlap. But the only way to start seeing that is just to be doing this a lot. So let's see what this guy wrote for this. He wrote G major 7 add sharp 6, which is really weird. That's a really weird way to think. Like I was saying, when I hear this chord, I would not think major 7 chord. But at the same time, I guess you could call it that because of like we're in the key of G and there's not a C7, dominant 7 in the key. So I can understand what he's saying. And like add sharp 6 is kind of meaningless to me. So if I were writing this tab, I would have gone with the... I probably wouldn't have written the chords out because when I teach people, I tend not to talk about music theory because it just makes things confusing. But unless they're starting to get it, so I probably would have gone with this approach, just like this, because most people this would just be an added layer of confusion unless you're trying to learn music theory. But I would have written it like that: C7, add 7, because that makes more sense to me. But I could see like if you're trying to stay diatonic, which means sort of staying in reference to the key that the song's in, which is G. I could talk more about that later, then this might make sense. And then the next chord, D13, I was saying I think I agree with that. Even without looking at this guy's tab, I would know that chord because 13 chords are something I actually use. I think they sound pretty nice. So I made sure I muted those. Let's see. So I guess I was wrong. Unless, let me think about this. Add 6. D7, add 6. That's weird. I would think this would give us, what I'm going to do is add a 5 in here. Let's see what happens. So the 5 of D is A. So I'm just going to add it up here because this note is A. Because I can't fit it over here with this shape. Let's see. That's really weird. That should have given us a 13 chord. So I don't know. Maybe sometimes this program isn't right. Let me make sure I did that right. So here's D. Let me get rid of this. Sometimes it's good to mute it out. So here's the 1, 3, flat 7. And then we have a B, which would be, let's say I use that B. Well, I'm just trying to do it. Let's see. B. So yeah, it's not giving us D13, but I'm pretty certain that's a D13 because the 6 is called the 13 once you already have the 7. So I don't know, maybe his program's just not picking it up because I'm pretty sure like here's the shape I use for 13s like all the time. Mute that out. It looks like that. I put it on D. This note is D. So let's see if this program gives a 13. So that gave a 13. There's nothing different between what I just had over here. This is D. Yeah, so this is D, C, F sharp, B, D, C, F sharp, B. So let's see, D, C, F sharp, B. These are the same notes. So now I'm just kind of curious why this program, I've never seen this program really not give the right answer. So that gave D13, so that's kind of fun, that's kind of strange. I guess what it's saying is because this B, I think here's what's happening here. When we use this B instead of this note is also B up here. So if I do this, let's see if it's still. So I think what's happening, like his program, what it's doing is if this B is in a lower octave than this B. So I think if this B is in the same octave as these, it's being considered the 6 and not the 13. Because this B right here is actually lower. It would occur right here. Whereas this B is higher up. Because here is the flat 7. Here's the 6. So this B is actually like the 6. but I would still consider it 13. I might actually be wrong there though. Some of my music theory isn't perfect because I used to really care about music theory, and then I started realizing it should just help you to play better. It shouldn't be like its own, like let's say you're doing math, like math, really knowing it, unless you're an engineer. But if you're trying to just be a good mathematician, it's all theoretical, and that's kind of what it is. But with music, I mean, it's ultimately about just playing music, so you don't really need to worry about all this stuff. But I could be wrong. I think my understanding is like, even if you had the flat 7 here and you added the 6 lower, you would still consider it a 13. But I don't know, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about this. But anyways, there's our chord. So I would have considered it D13, but the app is saying D7 add 6. So the 6 is the same thing as the 13. So yeah, that's a new question for me I hadn't really thought about, but that's kind of what's fun about this app. This site also has some other cool stuff, like if you just start playing around with here. I think the other thing I really like about this is, let me show it real fast. I think but my students really like playing around with this, and it's a fun way to start learning some stuff. Oh yeah, so if you go to chord calculator instead of chord namer, let's say you wanted to figure out all the D13 chords. So you scroll down, see we have like all sorts of chords. We go down to D13. We want the regular 13. See right here? There was a major 13, that would have a regular 7 in it. This has a flat 7 in it. So D13. The lowest note is going to be D. And here, this is what's cool about it. You can do, for note labels, you can either just leave it how it is right now. And I'm going to change this to flats, because I tend to think in flats when I'm thinking about these kind of chords. So here's different ways to play D13. But that, like, just having dots is kind of practical just to start playing it, but it doesn't really have any knowledge there. Like, this is, you could go strum this and you know this is D13, but you don't really know why, so it's much more helpful to, I don't really like to think in terms of letters. I like to think in terms of scale tones, because then I can use the shape for any chord later. So this is pretty cool. What it does is it generates all these chords right here. So the one like we were doing, I mean the one that we were doing isn't really possible to play on guitar. That's what's kind of interesting about it. Like you could do it on piano without doing the open string. But anyways, here's some cool shapes. So it's fun too just to do, like, let's just do D major chord. So change it to the root note is D major, and we'll do tones, and here I'm going to change it to sharps. No, it doesn't matter actually. We'll hit go. And I think it's fun to see like basic chords that you already know in terms of scale tones. So here's D major. So 1 5 1 3. This is called the voicing. 1 3 5 1 3. Blah blah blah. Here's a bar chord. So yeah, this is a great website. It's called JGuitar.com. And again, if you just go to Google and you type in the letter J and then guitar, and it pops up, and there's lots of cool stuff on here. So I recommend just starting to use this like while you're learning songs to figure out some chord names. And like like happened to me in this video, it raises a lot of questions, like, can I call that chord a D13 like I would have thought, or should it actually be called like a D7 add 6? So I mean, ultimately it doesn't really matter because I'm going to play it. but it might matter like later on if I wanted to start jamming with other jazz people and somehow I started getting confused about what was happening or something like that. So I hope this was helpful. Bye.